Leading off our discussion tonight, our Pennsylvania State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta. He's running for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania. And Cliff Albright, co-founder and executive director of Black Voters Matter Fund. He's the host of the podcast Black Power Revisited. Thanks to both of you for being here this morning. Representative Kenyatta, you and I talked on Monday, and you made it clear. You sort of had a moment in which you said, let's stop talking about the BS about this. Let's stop tweeting about John Lewis and all the great things about him. Let's get this done because there will not be another chance. If these states get away with what they're doing, that is the whole ball game.
You know, Allie, you said it very well in your lead up. We know exactly who Republicans are. We know exactly who the opponents to a free and fair elections are. Now the question for each and every one of us is, who are we? What are we willing to do in this moment? And I did say it earlier this week. It is not enough for us to lionize the civil rights heroes, the giants who fought, bled, and died to get us to where we are. You know, we've written about, learned about their sacrifice. Now the question is, what are we willing to sacrifice? Democracy requires something of us. I gave a speech at Gettysburg talking about the moment that we find ourselves in, talking about the bloody battle that was fought and waged on that hollow ground to preserve the Union. And now we have to each look in the mirror and ask, what are we willing to risk to preserve the Union for our kids and for our grandkids? You know, Cliff, Rashad, so many others were arrested protesting to ensure the right to vote. So many people have been standing up, putting their bodies on the line to ensure that this experiment in democracy sustains for the future. And let's be very clear, this is an experiment. There is nothing written on a tablet somewhere that says America has to succeed. It succeeds because every time we see a new generation of people step up to call us higher. And if we are silent in this moment, if we think that this is some movie where it all works out in the end, we will be sadly mistaken if we lose this fight. I have zero faith in the arsonists that are trying to burn down our democracy. As you said, we need to get rid of the filibuster and get to work to preserve our union.
So, Cliff Albright, that's been suggested. Jim Clyburn suggested it, saying you all can hang on to your filibuster for a few other things, but not for voting rights. But when Malcolm says you need to know who you are, you know who they are, the people who are trying to stop people from voting. You need to know who you are. I have to say, for the average person watching this show tonight, they think they're an American citizen. They may think they voted Democrat. What do they do? What does success look like for the average person who should be outraged that one of their fellow citizens' vote is being subjugated right now? What do they actually do?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ali. I think that, folks have got to, there's a saying, you got to count the cost. And folks have to think about what are the costs of this democracy, right? And what's at risk. People have to get involved in all sorts of ways. There have been a lot of people doing phone calls and text messages and doing social media outreach and all of that. But we are at a point now with the attacks against voting rights are as serious as what President Biden said they were a week ago in his speech, very passionate speech. If it's accurate that it's at risk the way that he says that this is the biggest risk in the Civil War, then we're going to need to do more types of direct action than just what it is that we've been doing. That's why, led by, sisters, Black women last week who took the action to the Hart office building, to the Senate offices and had a protest and got arrested. We did the same thing today because it's going to take that type of nonviolent, direct action, civil disobedience. Unfortunately, the same type of actions that we saw in the 60s leading up to the Voting Rights Act. Before the Voting Rights Act was passed, we had to go through a voting rights movement in the Black Belt of Alabama and Mississippi. It's going to take that kind of civil disobedience in order to get the voting rights we need now and to end the filibuster. And
the civil rights activists like Dolores Huerta and others have said it's going to need that kind of movement. But, back then it was easy to get into that kind of movement because you knew where the line was. You knew what broke the law, walking into a colored entrance somewhere or sitting at a counter that was not allowed for what they called colored people at the time. All that could be done. What does that civil resistance look like today, Malcolm Kenyatta? Should Americans of good conscience be prepared to do something that gets them arrested, to fill up the courts, to make politicians understand that Americans will not let these things happen to them?
There is nothing more sacred and nothing that is more worth our sacrifice. You know, I grew up in a Black Pentecostal church, and I remember so many pastors saying, don't wait for your neighbor because your neighbor might be waiting for you. That is true right now as well. Some folks are waiting around for somebody else to sound the alarm, for somebody else to step up. And Cliff is absolutely right. We've seen so many Black women in particular on the front lines of this movement. We can't wait around for somebody else to sound the alarm, for somebody else to put their bodies on the line. We have to be willing to do that. You know, I'm forever grateful for those Texas Democrats who their governor threatened arrest for them leaving the state. We have people who've been arrested for them leaving the state. This is the only moment we have. The only moment we have. And if folks don't step up, I don't know what's coming after this.
Cliff, President Biden had said that voters will show up again, despite how hard you'd work to keep them back. I want to just play for you what he said and get your response on the other side.
Look, the American public, you can't stop them from voting. We tried last time. More people voted last time than any time in American history in the middle of the worst pandemic in American history. More people did. And they showed up. They're going to show up again. They're going to do it again.
So Biden's he's relying on the idea that you can push, you can discourage, you can take out ballot boxes, you can take out 24-hour voting, you can take out mail-out voting, you can take out souls at the polls, you cannot give people water in their 12-hour lines while they vote, but they will overcome. Do you believe him?
No, I don't. And we've said it before, and not just me, but, you know, most of us that are in this space of organizing, electoral organizing, we cannot out-organize the levels of voter suppression that we're seeing now. It is insulting and unfair that the president would expect that in lieu of passing actual voting rights legislation, that he's just going to count on us to do another Herculean effort in order to overcome what is now historic levels of voter suppression, laws that weren't even in place during the last cycle, but now will be in place. We can't out-organize that, and we can't out-litigate that. We need voting rights legislation, and it cannot be sacrificed at the altar of the filibuster, right? We can't, on the one hand, say that voting rights are sacred, and then on the other hand, worship at the altar of the filibuster. You can't worship two gods, right? He's got to pick a side, and so we cannot just put that burden on the backs of community groups to have to out-organize this. Real quickly, just one example in Kansas that was talked about right here on this network. There's a bill that says basically organizing groups cannot act like they're election officials, which it's so vague. It can be interpreted as you can't even go out and do voter registration because those organizations could literally face criminal penalties. Right. You can't out-organize that.
I think there's a role for the president and for the executive branch, and I think, as I'm hearing from you, there is a role for every single one of us, and we are, in the next few days, going to have to think about what that role is. Everybody in America who believes in democracy has got to take this on as their own personal fight with people like you at the lead of it. Thank you. Pennsylvania State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta and Cliff Albright. We appreciate you kicking it off.